Welcome, and thank you for being here today. My name is Jodi Hammer, and I will be facilitating this session. I will be the moderator for this evacuated Peace Corps volunteer experience, then and now. I am the Career Services Specialist for Npca's Global Reentry Program, which you've already heard a little bit about. I'm really honored to have been asked by the Peace Corps Connect Conference Committee to serve in this role, and I just want to acknowledge again the incredible hard work that everyone on that committee has done in pulling together such a great conference. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward for you to be here and participate today in this. So the topic of evacuated Peace Corps volunteers and that experience is one that's very near and dear to my heart. Not because I was an evacuee myself, hardly the case. I was very fortunate to be able to extend my service in Ecuador to have a full 3+ years, and that was 94 through 97. Rather, it comes from the opportunity that I've had since then to really work closely with supporting the evacuees over the last 14 years. First, in my former role with Peace Corps headquarters, where I worked in the Career Center to provide career and transitional assistance to all RPCVs, but I dealt with a lot of evacuations during that time as well. So I really got to see firsthand the challenges and the resilience demonstrated by our RPCV population. And so I'm really excited more recently now to be with Npca for the last almost year and a half, I guess, working in their reentry program, providing career and transition assistance to not only the evacuees, the 7,300 evacuees that came back. We've tried to help them through a lot of online support during this crazy time of COVID, but also with return volunteers who've been back longer. So I'm very passionate about this topic and have some real strong beliefs in terms of the value that evacuees bring and the skills that they develop in that process. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more from our panelists who will share their own stories and how they transitioned back, and maybe how they've continued service in their, even after their abbreviated Peace Corps service. So in order of how they've served, when they've served, I'm going to very briefly introduce them because we want to really get into the meat of this, especially since we're running a little bit behind in the conference overall. So first, Ron Bloch is an evacuated Peace Corps volunteer from Venezuela. He served from 66 to 68 in the education sector. And he's now retired after a career recruiting and providing HR consulting and training, as well as outplacement and biotech. And it's fair to say, I'm going to just add that this caveat, he's only partly retired because he still dedicates a wealth of his time to helping the RPCV population. He has critiqued over 4,000 RPCV resumes. And as somebody who does a lot of resume reviews, 4,000 RPC resumes takes a long time. So thank you, Ron, for your help over the years in doing that as well. He's also served, and you'll hear him talk a little bit about, he served as a US Army officer in Korea after his Peace Corps evacuation due to the draft. So it's a very interesting story that he'll be able to share. Our next panelist is Margo Jones. She is an EPCV from Turkey, also served in the 60s in rural community development. And she's a graduate of St. Agnes College, which is now Loyola, and she studied 5 languages before the age of 21, which is so impressive. So no wonder you were a great candidate, Margo, for Peace Corps. She's been actively involved in tourism, public relations, and fundraising for the last 40 years. So she's also past president of the White Plains, New York Rotary Club and the Ocean City, Berlin, Maryland Rotary Club. And I believe many people heard the session that we had earlier in the week from the Rotary Club as well, and the partnership between Peace Corps and Rotary. So that's exciting. Welcome, Margo, as well. Our next panelist is Natalia Joseph, who is an evacuated PCV from Ukraine, 2019 to 20, so one of the COVID evacuees. She was serving in education. She currently works as a senior program associate at Venture for America, and she's passionate about community service, community development, cross-cultural communication, and foreign languages. And she also has a master's, congratulations, in international relations from the University of Chicago. So looking forward to hearing your story as well, Natalia. And last but certainly not least is Kelsey Sid. who is an RPCV who was evacuated in 2020 from South Africa, where she was a health volunteer. But she has the unique experience of she had served prior to that as an education volunteer in Guyana from 2017 to 19. So she has both experiences of the, completed and the evacuated before her normal time. So she currently works with survivors of sexual assault as a crisis counselor in Oakland. And she's a 6th-generation Californian and 2nd-generation RPCV, inspired by her mother, who also served in Botswana. She served from 2010 to 12. So thank you very much for all of you being here, the panelists. We so appreciate it. And let's just kick it off, because I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible for you to share your stories. I'd like to start actually by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves very briefly, maybe augment what I've shared, where you served, how long you were in country before you were evacuated, and a bit about your own unique evacuation experience. Let's go ahead and start. Margo, would you like to start?
Unmute.
If you can unmute, Margo, you're all set. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name, as she said, is Margo Jones. That's my maiden name. And I decided in high school that I wanted to go into the Peace Corps. My parents were not thrilled with this idea at all. I was invited after my application to go to Turkey and be in a junior year program. So actually I went to Portland, Oregon, to the State College there with 75 of my colleagues the summer after my junior year, and went back to Baltimore, Maryland, my hometown. During that senior year of college, I initiated a relationship with a doctor, Dr. Haybelly, at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and a student at Johns Hopkins University. And every week I went for an hour or more and spoke in Turkish to them. Then I went back and graduated from college and went right into the Peace Corps in the same month. Training again at Portland State College. And as was mentioned, that was my 5th language. I have a love affair with Latin. And then we flew, there was an airline strike during the time we flew. So we flew from Los Angeles, LAX airport over to Copenhagen. We had a night in Copenhagen. And then we flew from there to Istanbul, Turkey. And we were bused to MITU, which is a university in Ankara. And we spent a month there learning more Turkish. I was a rural community development worker, and I went out into the village in the end of August 1966. I will describe to you briefly, my village had nothing. I was appalled at their conditions, their living conditions. We had no running water. We went to the well in the morning at 5:30, which was a social event with the women. And we had not what you would call any toilet facilities. Your food, we had no refrigeration. We went to a market once a week in our county, and you had to buy what you could eat. I initially bought a few canned things, and when I opened them, they had worms and other things in them, and I had to throw them out. So it was just fresh food. We had one big oven, and we baked bread once a week. That was another experience with the women. And I did a lot of basic first aid. I eventually got a driver, and 7 days a week went to villages and taught girls basic health care and things like how not to abort yourself with the coat hanger. I got sick when I was over there. I had an infection in one of my fingers and they wanted to amputate it. And I said, no, I came in with 10, I'm leaving with 10. I had menstrual problems, but what really brought me down was an amoebic dysentery. And they decided to evacuate me in March of 1967. When I got to Turkey in the summer, it was 100 degrees. When I left, it was 30 below in the area I was in towards the Black Sea. And my flight came out of Istanbul, came with a doctor, a Peace Corps doctor, accompanied me back to the East Coast, and we landed in Dulles Airport. And my parents were there and my soon-to-be ex-boyfriend. And I don't think you want any more gory details at this time.
Well, thank you for sharing, Margo. I appreciate that. So you were a medical evacuee, and
Yes.
we're going to describe, differences in different kinds. So thank you so much for sharing. Ron, can you briefly speak on your Peace Corps service and the evacuation itself, really?
Okay. Like any Peace Corps volunteer, it's hard to summarize, but I will do that. When I graduated from college in 1966, I had a choice between the U.S. Army and the Peace Corps. I chose the Peace Corps, and we went to Puerto Rico to learn Spanish, which was like going to Brooklyn to learn English. And I was sent to Venezuela. There were 400 volunteers there. I was assigned to work in the high-rise slums of Caracas. There were like 80 buildings, 5,000 in my building alone. So I got involved in community development. While I was there a total of 18 months out of 24. What happened was that Congress was debating whether military service and Peace Corps service should be equal. I was a test case, went all the way to the presidential board, and I was drafted despite all those efforts. So after 18 months, I went into the Army, and the Army, in their wisdom, as I became a first lieutenant, assigned me to South Korea in charge of tactical nuclear weapons. So I had to go from Peace Corps to tactical nuclear weapons. It taught me a lot about flexibility, resilience, and humor. So that's my story in 25 words or less.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Ron. I appreciate that. Natalia, can you briefly describe just your service, but focused on your evacuation and how it came about?
Of course, yeah. So as you said, my name is Natalia Joseph. I served in Peace Corps Ukraine, and I was part of Group 54, which meant that I arrived in August of 2019, and then I was evacuated with the COVID-19 evacuation in 2020. I was there for just under 8 months, so a lot shorter, I think, than a lot of other people that are on this panel. And at the time of the evacuation, I was actually visiting a friend in Kharkiv, Ukraine. So I met him through like a global exchange program, actually. So that's like a fun little tidbit. But what's not fun about that was that I was on like the opposite side of the country when they announced the evacuation. My passport was on the other side of the country. So not only was I getting evacuated from the country, but I was also scrambling to get, all of the documents I needed and whatnot. That being said, I focused on education. I taught in a small city called Podilsky, kind of in the central south part of the country. And besides that, the evacuation was kind of extended due to COVID because all of the countries started shutting down airspace. We couldn't find flights. And so the evacuation process itself was about 4 days of everyone kind of in Kyiv trying to figure out when we would be able to find a flight to get us back to the United States. So that came with its own stress and its own anxieties as well. Especially communicating back home and trying to figure out where I'm going to live, etc. That being said, I made it back to Cleveland and everything is good. So that's kind of just a brief intro to the evacuation. I'm sure we'll get into some of the details here later.
Yes, we sure will. Thank you so much, Natalia. And lastly, let's hear from you, Kelsey, on the same question.
Thank you, Jodi. So again, my name is Kelsey. My pronouns are she and they. And after serving in Guyana for the full service of what was a challenging service, I'm sure everyone feels that way about their service, I thought about extending in Guyana and then decided I wanted to get the opportunity to go to another country, learn about another culture. And so I applied to go to South Africa. And I had gotten there mid-January 2020. And so I was just at the very end of PST when the evacuation happened. And I would say one of the positives kind of is that since I was in PST, the evacuation was like pretty organized because we were all together, and they could get us to the airport fairly quickly. So from start to finish, I think it was about 36 hours from when we found out we were going to get evacuated until we were on a plane.
Wow. Yeah. And I definitely recall hearing of the folks that were in PST and the challenges that that brought about, but also making it easier. So absolutely. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the feelings you were feeling, right, when you were evacuated, right? What feelings that brought up, and how did your evacuation impact the way that you talked about your service when you got back and through the years? You know, I'd love to hear about that. And it's kind of a combination question here, two-part. But perhaps can you share, Ron, can you share a little bit about how you felt when with your particular one, which was very unique, obviously, right? And then how that impacted you and how you talked about your service.
Great. Well, I would say I was very disappointed to have to leave early, but I finally had to accept it. When I came back and having gone through the military, it made a great story and got me lots of conversations and interviews, and sometimes job offers.
Wow.
But it was truly disappointing to have to leave early, without a doubt.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And how about maybe one of the COVID folks that maybe, Natalia or Kelsey, can you describe a little bit about, Kelsey, you shared a little bit, you said it was, easier because of being all together, but can either of you just share a little about the feelings that you dealt with, being evacuated before you were supposed to be, right? And being sent home in the height of COVID. How did that impact how you talked about your service and such? Natalia, Kelsey, go ahead.
So I definitely felt like really deeply sad, especially because right before that, we were all speculating about whether we were going to get evacuated or not because some other countries already had in Asia. And kind of the thought was, well, if no one got evacuated during Ebola, like, why would we get evacuated for this? So it was definitely like a huge surprise when the announcement was made that we were getting evacuated. And then I think because I was only in country for a little less than 3 months, I felt really weird about how to talk about it because it's like it felt like so brief. And,
Yeah.
I went to Seid and there were just like all these things that I knew were going to happen that never happened, that I feel like a little stunted about it. And then I was also like really impressed by the local Peace Corps staff and, in coordination with headquarters about getting that many volunteers on flights when, as Natalia said, all the airports were shutting down.
Right.
Really impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely I can't even imagine, but that whole global, like getting 7,300 people back within, such a small period of time, that's a pretty big undertaking. And sure. I know that clients that I've worked with in the past, if they've been evacuated, sometimes they feel feelings of like, not, I guess, guilt in a sense, like, oh, I had to leave early, I wasn't able to finish, and they feel like that impacts their ability to talk about their Peace Corps service. And so I know I, for one, was always a champion and have been, about however long you served in the Peace Corps, you were there, and what happened was not a fault of your own. And it's not there's not really a stigma as people, I think, sometimes assume that there is. So absolutely. With that,
I would agree with that, especially since I was there for 7 months. I was just getting into kind of a groove. Like I was starting to really get my language down. I was, feeling connected with my community, to my students, my colleagues, and then obviously I was still living with my host family.
right.
So to just like kind of, and since I was traveling, I kind of texted them and I was like, hey, like I'm leaving, I'm sorry. And so it was, I think, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but it was frustrating, and it was like upsetting because it's like I had just spent so much time over the last few months, like building these relationships, working really hard to, feel part of the community, and then kind of had to just leave very quickly and suddenly, and that was hard.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And really, you know, working with people to be able to include, even if they didn't get the grant, for example, they wrote the grant, they applied for it, or whatever they did, even if it didn't come through. I always say you can put that on your resume. And I think, Ron, you'd back me up on this, the resume guru here. You know, those kind of things. So like really you could still make a good case for, you know, for Peace Corps on your resume and things like that. So great. Let's move on to talk a little bit about the struggles you experienced coming back. Like once you were back, like after, yes, evacuation is difficult when you're there, you're coming back, but when you got back here, how did that impact you and your ability to move forward? And you know, what was that process of moving forward and finding something else for those who did, other than you, Ron, who went to serve in the military because of the draft? Natalia or Kelsey, might you be able to answer that one?
Yeah, I can definitely jump in. I think once again, because I wasn't in country very long, I don't think there was a lot of culture shock. We were also coming back to the United States, was basically shut down. Like I arrived in Ohio and I think it was like the next day or maybe the day after, it was almost immediate. Like Ohio went into a full shutdown. So there wasn't a lot of culture shock because everyone was kind of experiencing culture shock amongst the US. But the one thing that I really struggled with was like basically the economic tailspin. I'm a planner. And so like I had planned out my 2 years, I was going to go to grad school. And then I was kind of at home with my family, which I'm very blessed that I had that, you know, that safety net. But I was kind of sitting in my quarantine hotel thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so I don't know if this is like the direction you were going with, but I think like finding a job, figuring out next steps as like opportunities, like we were just watching opportunities shut down. Like that was the number one thing that I think I had to overcome. I think Peace Corps and the National Peace Corps Association did a good job at, you know, hosting lots of events, virtual events, having opportunities so that you could get resume help, things like that. And I was also lucky in that when I applied for Peace Corps originally, I also applied to grad school. So while I was in quarantine, I just kind of grabbed all those applications, and it was like right at the end, some colleges were very nice and open and extended their application process. So I ended up applying to grad school, and that's kind of where I hung out. And so I think that's how I overcame the struggle.
Oh, that's great that you had that as a backup, if you will. Little did you know you'd need it so soon, but
yeah. But it worked out.
Good for you. That's wonderful. And Margo, I'm wondering, given, you know, you had a medical evacuation, right? And so coming back, it's a little bit different, a medical evacuation versus, you know, the COVID, you know, that type of thing. Can you share very briefly, you know, a few words on how did you move forward, and how was that experience coming back after your medical evacuation?
Well, 3 weeks after I got home, the Peace Corps called me and asked me if I'd like to go train for India.
Oh.
And I said no. And they said, well, that's what you put on your first application. I said, yes, that was 3 years ago. I said, first of all, I'm still sick. And they had sent me to a doctor at George Washington University Hospital.
Uh-huh.
And I was still seeing him for a year, you know, after I returned. But
Wow.
I too felt like it was the best experience I've ever had, the toughest job you'll ever love. And that's the way I portrayed it to my family and friends. But when I came back, everybody was wearing mini skirts, and I didn't even own a mini skirt. And I found some of my friends to be very shallow because I'm a believer and always have been. And I moved to Washington, D.C. I worked on 16th Street. I could see the White House from my window. And really enjoyed life as a single person for several years before I married.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Margo. I really appreciate that. And I'm wondering, Kelsey, when you came back with the evacuation, you said, you know, you had been there so little time. What I noticed that you're employed, and you were employed, I think, within, I don't know, a matter of months. What did you do to bring that about so quickly? That's impressive.
Well, I think like this is still in process, and like because I had left shortly after returning from a 2-year service, I did have quite a bit of culture shock coming back, even though I was only in South Africa for 3 months.
Sure.
And especially like there was quite a bit of scarcity mindset coming back, you know, like I had heard that grocery stores were, you know, low stock, but compared to where I had been living, there was still abundance. So it was very confusing coming back,
Sure.
seeing the scarcity mindset, when to me, I was like, we have running water, we have electricity, like I have a flush toilet. I feel like I'm like living in the lap of luxury right now. And, you know, Peace Corps did a lot of outreach about volunteer opportunities and employment opportunities, because I think they knew that like having, you know, 7,300 people like with nothing to do was like a bad situation. So
Ideal.
the organization that I'm supporting, Survivors of Sexual Assault, I found through some of that outreach that Peace Corps did.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I guess I'm curious if anyone would be able to maybe take this question. From your own experience, what more could have been done? I'm kind of curious to hear from not only the recently returned, but maybe before. Is there something more that could have been done to help in your transition as an evacuated volunteer, looking back? Anyone who would be so gracious as to, hey, great, Kelsey, go ahead.
So after I got ICOS from Guyana, I had a real struggle with mental and emotional health. And I felt like the resources Peace Corps had were completely insufficient and hard to access. You know, I'm in Oakland, and there were quite a lot of providers on that database list that they had, and everyone I called said they didn't know what I was talking about. They didn't know how they ended up on that list, and they wouldn't take the Peace Corps insurance. And then I contacted Peace Corps because I like really needed some mental health support. And the response I got was really dismissive. I mean, it was like, we hope you figure it out, but there was no other help. So I hope that the changes in the RPCV healthcare like include a big boost in mental health support and reevaluating that list of providers, because from my experience, no one even knew what I was talking about.
Absolutely. I'm really sorry to hear that. And I have heard that, yeah, that's definitely a priority. I know that, you know, working on that to improve, you know, some of those systems and the support, because ultimately our PCVs, evacuated PCVs, they deserve that. And so it needs to be, you know, change needs to be made. And so I think that's something that they're working on. So great. Thank you for sharing that, Kelsey. I appreciate that. Did somebody else want to share something?
Well, financially, it was a problem for me because we were paid $150 a month. In Turkey, that wasn't even enough money to live in the 1960s. And, you know, I bought a bed and I had to return it before I left because I hadn't even fully paid for my bed. And then we were paid $150 at home, you know, per month. So I got that money, but it didn't go very far with renting an apartment in Washington, D.C.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think financially, if you're evacuated, there should be some source of medical care and financial support. My mom was the one who helped me, and she was a state official for 18 years. You know, understood a little better than my dad why I was doing this, and that I was very idealistic.
Sure. So thank you for sharing, all of you, on that. I really do appreciate that. And I'm curious as to, I want to move into very briefly a little bit about, you know, the third goal of Peace Corps, right? We all, you know, we know of the third goal. It's, you know, the third goal has oftentimes been, you know, it's of course the promoting the better understanding of other people's on the part of Americans, right? But it often doesn't get the recognition it deserves, right? Or like the important role that it plays. And I say that from my own 12 plus years of experience working in Peace Corps' Office of Third Goal and Return Volunteer Services. And I'm just curious as to, what role, if any, did third goal activities or interactions, right, play in your own transition home post-evacuation? Did you find any ways that you could maybe talk about and communicate with, or work with populations and incorporate some of, your service, that type of thing? And I'm wondering, maybe Margo, could you start with this one? Were you able to do anything in that?
I certainly found that talking about the people who were so happy, my villagers were the happiest people I had ever seen. And I talked a little about them praying 5 times a day. You have to be pointed in the right direction with them. And the children, were wonderful. And the babies, they used to leave them in their cribs until they got up to walk. So they would be about 2 before they started walking. And I taught a little bit of childcare, and I would pick the babies up, and they, when they were infants, and they were just dumbfounded at that. And I would describe these scenes to my friends when I came home, and try to enlighten them about a totally different culture from what we had in the United States. And I enjoyed it. Part of it was the sharing, and I still have done that my entire life, and I enjoy volunteering. When I retired, the first thing I did was go to the local hospital. And I spent 10 years in Maryland as a volunteer at Atlantic General Hospital.
Oh, wonderful.
That relates back to the Peace Corps.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Margo. And Natalia, can you add a little bit in terms of your own experience with incorporating maybe the third goal into your own transition home?
Of course, yeah. And so I think what Margo said, I do a lot of that, just talking, right, about Ukraine with your friends, your family, people that you come in contact with. Like I said, I ended up going to grad school, and so I was in international relations. And so obviously talking about Ukraine was really relevant and poignant, especially like talking about the war, talking about people, talking about Zelensky, right? So a lot of my third goal conversations were not necessarily like volunteer based, but they were very much classroom academic based. And I wrote my thesis on Euromaidan and Ukraine civil society. So I think a lot of my interaction with Ukraine for the last year like focused on the academic portion. That being said, I'm also involved in the Ukrainian, the Alliance for Peace Corps Ukraine. So getting involved in trying to continue those connections between the United States and Ukraine. And then I also just, continue conversations with my host family, friends, and things that I have in Ukraine as well. So that's like a brief history of what I'm still doing.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm wondering next, a little bit, if you could share a little bit about how your Peace Corps service, and in particular the evacuation, maybe served to help you develop marketable or transferable skills that, when you were applying for jobs afterwards. Did it help you in any way? And if so, what kinds of skills were you able to spotlight from your evacuation in particular? Let's see. Ron, would you like to go first?
Okay. In my case, what I found is that people wanted stories, that they didn't want a lot of philosophies. And you could come away with lots of good stories. So in that way, you develop rapport. But I also learned from the Peace Corps how to work really independently, and also to be very flexible and resilient in all those ways. Part of the storytelling, for example, when I was first in the community, they introduced me, and some people thought I was CIA. When I came back to the United States, some people still thought I was CIA. So it is an education process that had nothing to do with that.
Yep, absolutely. I've heard those stories again and again, you bet. And Margo, could you talk about maybe if you feel you gained some marketable or transferable skills that helped you to move on after your medical evacuation?
Well, it really looks great on your resume. I never had an interview where they didn't say, you were in the Peace Corps?
Right.
And you can't answer that in 10 words or less. You have to kind of tell the story. And I always told the story with the positives. you know,
Yes.
but I love their commercial that said, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? And the Peace Corps person is the one who believes that it's always half full.
Yes, I love that one as well from the ads when they had the, glasses half empty or full. And then there's a great story of, or a joke of that one. And it's the optimist sees the glass half full. The pessimist sees the glass half empty. The Peace Corps volunteer sees it as enough water to bathe in.
So in February, I set out to find all what had happened to the 35 people in our group.
Oh, wow.
And on Tuesday evening, my site mate and I hosted a Zoom meeting and 17 people participated of the
Wow.
30 people
Great.
that are still alive.
That's
Five of them
impressive.
passed away, yeah.
From
And
the
it-
60, that's really impressive.
Many of them we had not talked to in 50 some years, but it was really, they're all willing to come back and do it again.
Oh, that is absolutely, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it. Anyone else want to add to that in terms of marketable or transferable skills that you really got out of your evacuation experience in particular?
I mean, I think languages, those
Sure.
are extremely important as you're going into the job field. I work on a programming team, so having an education and a teaching background really helps me. But I think like regarding soft skills, being able to talk and communicate and have those open dialogues about things that are very difficult. When you're in culture, in another country, you're dealing with people that have very different understandings of culture, of norms. And so being able to talk about that in a job interview and say, I can work cross-culturally, I can work with people that have different opinions, different, viewpoints as me, I think is extremely important in today's market. And I think that helped me a lot when I was job searching.
Absolutely. That's so great. And just, the evacuation is such an example of adversity and an example of, you can really show how you're resilient, as I think Ron said earlier, adaptable. Those are the kinds of skills, those transferable skills that really companies want, right? They can teach, oftentimes they can teach the hard, what do you call hard skills, right? They can teach you how to do this program, but they can't necessarily teach you easily some of these transferable skills. So I think it's fair to say you all, sounds like you all got a lot from your Peace Corps service and from that whole evacuation itself. So great. I would like to ask if folks, what kinds of service? I know some of the service that you've already talked about, Ron, I know about, with the resumes and such, but how have you continued to serve, here at home, however long you've been back, right? From your, how have you taken your Peace Corps ideals and your commitment to making a difference, helping, improve things or whatever, and done that here so far? If Natalia, can you share first, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was ready to answer the question about if we were going to go into Peace Corps service in the future, in which I would say yes. Eventually, I would love to do that. Regarding like volunteering domestically, I would say I'm like I said earlier, I am part of the Alliance for Ukraine. So I serve as a secretary on the board there, making sure that trying to improve relations between Ukraine and the United States. Outside of that, there's no like intense volunteering happening at the moment, though.
Well, you have just transitioned back and gotten your full-time job and all of that, but
yes, yeah.
And you're a member of Npca too, being here in this
Yes.
community as well, which is great and huge. So let's see, Ron, can you speak a little bit more of the things that you've done since? I know you've done a wealth of things.
Well, yes, since I had a career in recruiting and also outplacement career management, I offered this service to returning Peace Corps volunteers. And as I mentioned, I've helped over 4,000 so far, and I still get resumes in now. Here in the background, you see postcards from around the world. It's the only thing I asked for. And it's a lot of fun to get postcards from around the world. Right now, they're mainly from the United States, but
From people you've helped, you mean?
And again.
From people you've helped, Ron? You asked for postcards from people. I did not know that. That's a great backdrop.
And that's just a few of many I put up there.
Of course.
But it's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying.
Great. Wonderful.
I've always volunteered for, everything you can imagine, but since I'm in Florida, I'm a member of the Democratic Women's Club of the county. I am on the legislative committee. I'm at my church. I'm a volunteer librarian. I have access to thousands of books, many of which are uncategorized, and we're doing that.
Sure.
I'm a volunteer writer for the newsletter in my development. There are over 950 homes here, and it's bi-monthly, which is fine with me, and it's called Margo's Out and About.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't just do restaurants, I do, all kinds of attractions to introduce the people in our community to things they could do. And
Wow.
whenever
That
I
is-
go to the club,
Sorry.
people stop me and say, oh, I read your article about big shots, which is a golf thing. And, it made me want to go there. So
Nice.
I'm a writer for TripAdvisor, which is a website.
Yep.
And I've had as many as 7,000 people in the first 10 days after I posted read it. They calculate that, and they let you know that, people are, and I write very positive articles. I don't do anything negative when it comes to TripAdvisor.
Oh, that's great. That is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Margo. And thank you to all of you. I want to be respectful of time and give you a little bit of a break before our next session, which I believe starts at 1:20, I believe. So I would love to close this out by asking our panelists if any of you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share, whether it's about your evacuation, lessons for people who may be evacuated, tips for people who may be evacuated in the future, anything like that as we close this panel up.
Well, I have never met a Peace Corps volunteer that I couldn't talk to, and I've had people come up to me at weddings and say, so-and-so was in Africa, or so-and-so was in South America. But they
Right.
want to meet you and they want to talk to you because they've been or are talking about going into the Peace Corps.
Oh,
So I
wonderful.
think it's served me well.
And you can have such an impact in that way, right? Inspiring the future
Yes.
generation of Peace Corps. Anyone else want to say any kind of closing comments before I ask you my one final question here, really quick on the way out?
I
In
mean,
my
I just want
case,
to thank
I
you.
just treasure the time I've had in the Peace Corps, excuse me, Natalie. And I never hesitated to share it, and people love to hear it. So I'm very
Great.
proud of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ron. And Natalia, you had something to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for having me. And then I think a closing thought would be like to rely on the Peace Corps network. I thought that like my friends, they were like the best during evacuation, relying on the people that you met during your service. So that's all I have to say.
Your Peace Corps family, it's with you the rest of your life, right? So
Exactly.
Yes.
that's great. Well, wonderful. My closing question is really a poll. I'm just going to have you raise your hand if you think, or folks in the audience can put their hands up as well. How many of you think you are considering perhaps returning to Peace Corps at some point? I'll raise my hand. I hope to when I retire. That is, if I ever retire. I'm an old parent and have a small child, so we'll see, but that is my hope. Great. Awesome. Thank you. I just want to end by thanking all of our esteemed panelists for coming on, for just being so open and sharing about your own experience and lessons learned. And it's wonderful to see the returned Peace Corps volunteer community that we have that's ready to actively engage and work with people who maybe want to go into service and such. So thank you very, very much.